Ei, gute wie. Es wird mal wieder Zeit, bei Thomas Game Docs nachzuschauen, wie die Synchronstimmen zu diversen Videospielcharakteren über die Jahre entstanden sind. Da hatten wir schon Toad und Yoshi, heute nehmen wir mal Bowser.
Okay, I want to try something right now. Here's what Bowser sounded like in 1996. He sounds like some kind of animal creature, right? Then here's what he sounded like in 2002.
Mario! How dare you disturb my family vacation?
Das ist der Unterschied, ne?
All of a sudden, he's speaking full English sentences, like he's a human. And then here's what he sounds like now. He's back to growling and grunting. That's right, out of any Nintendo...
Was aber komisch ist, weil sein Growling und Grunting hat ja Untertitel Mario Odyssey. Also er sagt schon was, wir können es nur nicht verstehen. Aber, hey Mario, warum störst du meine Familienausflüge? So, das ist halt witzig.
Nintendo character, I think that Bowser's voice has changed the most. But why is that? Well, I started looking into things behind the scenes, and wow, there's a lot going on here. So I want to take you on the journey that I went on to figure out the answer to one simple question. Why has Bowser's voice changed so much?
Oder wie ich es bezeichne, wer ist die Synchronstimme von Bowser?
In the beginning, Bowser wasn't voiced by a human at all.
Klar.
Before I explain that, I first want to clarify that I'm not talking about the Mario cartoons or the old Mario anime either. No, I'm talking about big main series Mario games. And for Bowser, his voice first appeared in 1996. I actually made a whole video about this a while back, but I'll explain it here again. Unlike Mario and Peach, Nintendo didn't want to hire an actual voice actor to play the role of Bowser. So they turned to sound effect libraries. These are essentially huge collections of pre-recorded sound effects that show up in just about...
Da haben die doch, glaube ich, auch das Ba-Ba-Ba-Ba-Ba her. Dünn, dünn, dünn. Entschuldigung. Da haben die das doch auch her. Das haben wir doch in einem anderen Video schon geklärt, ne?
About every video game, cartoon, and movie. A classic example would be a boing sound effect. It would be silly to record a new boing sound every time one was needed, so instead, you get it from a sound effect library. But these libraries don't just have goofy sound effects. No, they've recorded just about any sound you could think of. So, when Nintendo started developing Mario 64, they picked out a variety of pre-recorded sound effects to make up Bowser's voice. Looking at the character, he seemed like some kind of big, snarling creature, so they decided to use animal sounds. Bowser's roar, for instance, is a sound effect called Cougar Growl Animal Mountain Lion Cat 01.
Toll.
Here's the original sound effect. And then here's the pitched up version used for Bowser.
Warum wird er nach hoch gepitcht? Ich hätte ihn vielleicht eher runtergepitcht und bedrohlicher gemacht. Hä?
Another good example is the noise that Bowser makes when he's killed. It's actually a sound effect called Animal Creature Large Animal Death Scream.
Ist das ein Nilpferd oder so?
According to the description, it's a mixture of pig and wild boar noises. Lovely.
Oh nein.
Then, of course, there's Bowser's...
Da ist wirklich ein Tier gestorben bei dem Soundeffekt. Ich sag's nur.
...evil laugh. This one is really interesting because it's the only human sound effect that Bowser uses. It's actually a very slowed down version of a sound effect called Human Laugh Comical Laugh Male. Here's how it sounds at normal speed. Now, you might notice that voice sounds kind of familiar, and that's because it was recorded in the early 80s by Charles Martinet, the man who would eventually provide Mario with his iconic voice.
Here we go!
Nah.
That's right, before he was Mario, Charles Martinet voiced Bowser.
Was?
Oh, and interestingly, the sound is also used for booze, just sped up a bit. So that's where Bowser's original voice came from. It was all stock sound effects.
Okay,
And
das Video
these
habe ich noch
sound
nicht
effects-
gesehen. Ich habe so manches Video schon gesehen, aber das mit dem Bowser habe ich noch nicht gesehen. Das wüsste ich ja. Also, dass er irgendwie von Katzen kommt, das hört man ja schon raus, ne? Aber dass das Charles Martinet ist die erste Stimme von Bowser. Ja, Sigi. Ist er sich dessen überhaupt bewusst? Ich meine, es ist ja nur dieses Ho, 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 ho. Aber naja. Und Charles Martinet ist Puhu.
were reused again and again in various Mario games. Let me show you what I mean. Here's Mario Kart 64, and then here's Mario Tennis. And lastly, here's Mario Golf. All of these games use the exact same sound effect for Bowser.
Was sonst?
It's certainly efficient. But then, in 2002, everything
Mario!
changed. Nintendo were developing a game called Super Mario Sunshine, the grand follow-up to Mario 64. And the developers were keen to make this game more cinematic. The director said, "You may say this new Mario is a kind of cinematic experience." Wow, that's certainly bold. So, to tell a more dramatic and complex story, Nintendo needed all the characters to speak in full sentences, Bowser included. And frankly, the current animal noises they were using just wouldn't work. So they started holding auditions across America to find a human who could play the role of Bowser. One guy who showed up to these auditions was Scott Burns. He was originally a radio host in the 1980s, but he was fired from his job. So he went into voice acting instead. And one fateful day in 2002, he was called into an audition for Nintendo. He read lines for 3 different characters, one of whom was Bowser. Now, like Peach's current voice actress, Scott Burns had never actually played a single Mario game in his life. In fact, he didn't recognize who Bowser was. He was just shown this pixelated image of a turtle creature and told to give it a villainous voice. But he couldn't scare children, he was told that as well. So Scott Burns started to think, and that's when he came up with an idea. What if he based his voice on Santa Claus? I mean, no one's scared of Santa, right? Yeah, that's right. Bowser's voice was based on Santa. So Scott combined a sort of villain voice
will hören, was
with
der
a
da
very
spricht.
typical
In
ho,
dem
ho,
Clip.
ho Santa impression. And it worked. He got the role. Now, of course, Scott was pleased. But remember, he didn't even know who Bowser was. However, there was someone else who did know.
I remember going home and my son, who was probably 12 or 11 years old at the time, I said, "Hey, look, I auditioned for, I got this role." And his eyes, he knew Bowser, and he just couldn't believe it. He said, "You're Bowser?"
Before long had passed, Super Mario Sunshine was released, with Scott Burns providing the voice of Bowser. Again, keep in mind that Bowser was speaking in full sentences for the first time ever.
Junior, I've got something difficult to tell you about Princess Peach. That's my boy. Well put, son. The Royal Koopa line is as strong
Ist das
as
nicht
ever.
dieses I wonder what's for dinner?
Let's just rest a while.
Mal suchen gleich.
So, this was definitely a big change for the character of Bowser, and the reaction from fans was mixed, shall we say. Having Bowser speak full lines of English dialogue, well, it took a bit of getting used to. One review from the time described the game as having, quote, some of the lousiest voiceover work to be found on the GameCube. Ouch. So, Nintendo decided to go for a compromise. Scott Burns remained as the voice of Bowser. He was a great voice actor, after all. But the character would no longer speak in full sentences. He was back to growling and grunting.
Ich weiß nur, dass heute Kenny James den Bowser spricht, aber jetzt weiß ich den Übergang nicht. Bin gespannt.
You can hear that, for instance, in Mario Kart Double Dash.
Go!
There is, however, one video game series that did not follow this change. Super Smash Bros.
Stimmt.
To this very day, every single Smash Bros. Game uses animal sound effects for Bowser instead of the human voice clips used for the rest of the series. Take a listen. So why is this? Well, it's hard to pin down to a specific reason, but according to a number of inside sources, this decision comes straight from the top, from Super Smash Bros. Director Masahiro Sakurai. Why he prefers to use the retro-style animal noises instead of the modern human grunts is impossible to say for sure, but it's not just Bowser. Donkey Kong uses realistic gorilla noises.
Ja, das könnte vielleicht noch da von den ersten Smash Bros. Teilen kommen. Guck mal, zu Smash Bros. 64 oder Melee, gab es, da gab es Grant Kirkhope. Okay, oh, Banana. Und wenn er das nicht mochte und stattdessen darauf zurückgriff, tja, und da ist er bei geblieben, ne?
Diddy Kong uses realistic chimpanzee sounds. And King K. Rool uses crocodile grunts. Anyway, back to Bowser.
Das ist natürlich so eine Sache, K. Rool, da habe ich nicht drüber nachgedacht. Das ist ein echte Krokodil-Ding, aber den gibt's ja nur in Smash Ultimate.
Voice. By now, Scott Burns was the resident voice for Bowser, appearing in all sorts of Mario games. However, fate would soon play a cruel trick on him. Scott was a member of the Screen Actors Guild, a union for actors working in the film industry. And this union has a list of which companies you can work for if you're a member. If a film studio or game developer isn't on that list, you can't work for them. One day, Scott Burns got a letter from the union, which said, "It has come to our attention that you have worked for a non-signature." That's right, Nintendo weren't on the list of approved companies, so Scott wasn't allowed to work for them. And so the union gave him two options: leave the union forever and never come back, or stop working with Nintendo immediately. Scott chose the latter.
Warum genau? Einfach weil die komische Regularien
Which
haben.
left Nintendo scrambling for a new actor to portray Bowser. You see, Nintendo had a new game coming out in just a few months called Super Paper Mario, and they needed someone to play Bowser ASAP. With little time to spare, they found a temporary replacement in the form of voice actor Eric Newsom. Here's a taster of his take on the role.
Yeah, me? No!
Das klang ein bisschen wie Donkey Kong. Ich hätte nie drüber nachgedacht, dass er in Super Paper Mario eine neue Stimme hatte. Was zur Hölle?
While that was going on, Nintendo were busy searching for a more permanent replacement to take on Bowser's role. And once more, they held auditions across America in search of Bowser's new voice. And one of the actors who auditioned was a man called Kenny James. Now, Kenny's path into voice acting is a bizarre story in and of itself. One day in 2001, he decided to become a voice actor, so he set up a website for himself and kind of expected job offers to start rolling in. They did not. In fact, the very first job that came his way was a man who paid $8 for a Scooby-Doo phone message.
"Hey, Scoob, answer the phone, man!" You know, and I would, and then I'd have to do Scooby-Doo. I'd have to be all like,
Now, obviously, $8 is not enough money to buy food. So Kenny James had a side job selling suburban propane. One day, he was delivering a lady some propane when she heard him talking about this Scooby-Doo answering machine thing. And that's when the ball started rolling. The woman, it turned out, worked at a local recording studio and suggested that she could start sending him details about any future auditions, which included Nintendo's audition for the role of Bowser. So Kenny was sent some lines and some audio to reference, both of which were bizarrely from Super Mario Sunshine.
Junior, I've got something difficult to tell you about Princess Peach.
So he assumed that what Nintendo wanted is someone to mimic that voice. He did his best impression of Scott Burns and sent the audio off to Nintendo. Kenny James had never had a proper voice acting role before, so he wasn't very hopeful at all that he would get the job, but it was worth a shot. 2 weeks later, he got a response that shocked him. He got the role. He was officially the new voice of Bowser. when he entered the recording studio to record his lines, he was pretty terrified. And that's when he found something else out. He was basically never ever gonna speak in full English sentences as Bowser.
I've said 4 words in 15 years in
Which
English. Showtime? Showtime. That one. Mario, Peach, and Nintendo. Those are the 4 words I've said in English. Everything else is Bowserese.
You can hear a sample of this Bowser-ese in one of Kenny James's first games as Bowser, Mario Kart Wii.
Also eigentlich gar nicht so lange dabei, der Gute, ne? 2008.
Okay, so one last thing before we move on. There's actually a weird date discrepancy going on here. 2 of the dates don't line up at all. Kenny James first started voicing Bowser in 2005, but Scott Burns only left the role in 2007. That doesn't make sense. Well, it seems as though Kenny James was originally just a temporary voice for Bowser while Scott Burns was busy in 2005. And then in 2007...
Ich könnte mir vorstellen, dass für Mario und Luigi bei den Olympischen Spielen einfach alte, frühere, das haben die oft gemacht, Voice-Clips wieder benutzt haben und dass nicht Scott Burns für das Spiel wieder neue Recordings gemacht hat.
After the union dispute, that's when Kenny James took on the role full-time. If you listen to the voice clips from the games around that time, you're probably going to hear a mixture of Kenny James and Scott Burns. But nowadays, it's been 16 years since Kenny James first took on the role of Bowser. If you pick up any game from the last decade or so, then chances are all of the Bowser noises you're hearing were recorded by Kenny James. Which is great. This is just my opinion, of course, but I believe that modern Bowser sounds the best he's ever sounded. I mean, just listen to this roar.
Ein bisschen editiert vielleicht,
what
ne?
happened to all of the old Bowser voices? Well, Scott Burns is doing just fine for himself. He is a prolific voice actor whose voice you've probably heard in something, even if you didn't know it.
In this corner, the marvelously mucky mud.
Plus,
Glaub's
those
nicht.
union issues sorted themselves out around 2008, when he returned for one final appearance as Bowser in the game Super Mario Sluggers. Since then, he's also voiced the announcer in every single Mario Tennis game. Eric Newsom, who took over Bowser's voice temporarily, has continued to work as a voice actor with Nintendo. In fact, he is the permanent voice of Meta Knight in the Super Smash Bros. Games.
Come back when you can put up a fight. You've much yet to learn. Come.
Next time you're playing, keep an ear out for his voice. Masahiro Sakurai, the director of the Smash series, continues to use animal sounds in his games instead of the many, many human recordings available to him. But he's in charge, it's up to him. And lastly, Kenny James continues to voice Bowser to this very day. I
Immer
hope
noch.
I will continue hearing his voice for a long time.
Ne? Das Video ist 2 Jahre alt, aber ist trotzdem...
All of this is to say, Bowser's voice has changed
Bald 3.
dramatically over the last 3 decades. From animal noises, to full English sentences, to the growls and grunts we're used to hearing nowadays. Whether you prefer him as a fearsome beast or as a Santa Claus, that's up to you. Also, Princess Peach is another character whose voice has changed a surprising amount over time, so if you want to hear just why that is, I've got a video that you can check out. It's on.
Ich finde, der macht bestimmt wieder ein neues Video über Peach, wenn das neue Spiel rauskommt, so wie es mit Mario getan hat. Das könnte ich mir vorstellen. Ansonsten ist das Bowser-Video noch aktuell, etc. Wie gesagt, ich wollte mal gucken, Scott Burns, Alter. Scott Burns, Bowser. Was er da eben gesprochen hat. Das sah so witzig aus. Nein, ich finde nicht. Scott Burns, kein Bock. Dann, Peach ist aber gesungen von Scott Burns, Bowser.
Understand, I'm gonna love you too.
Ich glaube, ich muss es nicht weiter. Und was ich wollte, was wollte ich noch? Was war das andere, was ich wollte, Freunde? Es waren zwei Sachen. Achso. I wonder what's for dinner. Ach, das war er.
I wonder what's for dinner.
Ich dachte, das hatte was zu tun. Ich dachte, das wäre ein Prototyp gewesen. Vielleicht war es so eine Fankreation, weil ich das wieder finden würde, ne? Nicht das, sondern... Ich war das gar nicht offiziell. Das ist halt auch super witzig. Ich komme wohl nicht drauf auf die Schnelle. Dann war es vielleicht gar nicht. Dann war es vielleicht gar nicht so. Schon x Jahre her, dass ich das gesehen habe. Ich dachte, das wäre offiziell irgendwie zu Mario Sunshine so ein Prototyp gewesen. Schau mal hin, Early. Und da war das mit den Animationen, mit den Mundbewegungen und so. Da hat er so ein paar Sätze gesagt, unter anderem halt dieses I wonder what's for dinner. Aber scheinbar nicht. Okay, habe ich mich scheinbar vertan. Egal, Leute. Was für komische, verrückte Videos man da trifft, ne? Ach, YouTube heutzutage. Aber ich hatte Spaß. Wir haben wieder was gelernt, ne? Eine gute Sache. Haut rein. Danke fürs... warte, ich möchte mal zurück. Denn ganz wichtig, was ich nicht vergessen darf, ist natürlich dem Video einen Daumen nach oben zu geben. Ich mache euch das immer gut vor, damit ihr das auch bei meinen Reactions tun könnt, wenn ich es mir verdient habe. Haut rein und Gute!